So today I'm teaching how to cut your interpretation. We don't have a warm-up, so we're just going to go straight into it. That sounds like the beginning of a TP round. I'm just going to go straight into my first point. Yeah, so I want to start with a story arc. I made a little story. I found the story arc on Google and made up a little story. This guy's Max. So this is your story arc, really what your story is going to follow. For it to be a good interp, you should have like a bunch of different elements. So the first element of your story is going to be the inciting incident. So something interesting happens. This is the hook. Originally, for what I found online, I had exposition first before the inciting incident. But for interps, usually you want to have a hook to draw your audience in at the beginning. So this is Max, and he decided he wants to go to the top of the mountain to slay the dragon. Next is the exposition, and it's basically introducing your characters. That's going to happen pretty much in your introduction. So this is Max. He has a sword and curly hair. Then there's the rising. So he's going up the mountain. There we go. He's going up the mountain to the dragon. Then there's the crisis, is when he comes to the big dragon that he has to slay. And then there's the climax. He eventually beats the dragon, slays it. Then there's the denouement. That's what it is?
Denouement.
Yeah. Denouement. Yeah. So it's a French word. I had to look it up several times to figure out how to pronounce it, and I'm still not quite sure. But basically, it's just wrapping things up at the end of your story. You already had the climax, all of the cool stuff happened. Now you want to find out how your story ends. It seems like interps generally don't have like a long denouement because there isn't much time, and this is the biggest part of it. And then finally, there's the end. So Max is the king now because he slayed the dragon. So you want to make sure that all of your interp follows the story arc, that you have your hook, you introduce your characters, then you have, basically the story, the crisis, the climax of your story, which is really important, and then just tie things up, and then you'll have the end of your story. So so something that's really important is to see what the actual ballots say, because that's what the judges are going to be rating you on. They have exactly what they're looking at to see how good your story is. They look at the ballots. So each ballot has different criteria for your content for each of them. Biblical presentation content, it has several criterion. It should present the selections. Actually, I'm going to pause here. Show of hands, who's doing an interp this year? Okay, so who's planning on doing biblical? Okay. And then original/open. Original, okay. And then duo. And there's humorous too. Humorous? I don't know what the humorous ballot looks like, so I wouldn't be able to say much on that. But okay, so biblical, I'm just going to go through biblical content says it needs to present selections which enhance one's overall understanding of Scripture. So it needs to make you understand Scripture better. It needs to move, entertain, and instruct or provoke the audience to thought. So that's it would have to have a central theme, which is I'm going to be talking about that later on. But the theme, I think personally, is your most important part of your interp. It needs to develop a unified total presentation and of course meet the time requirement. Then for original, the ballot says it needs to write and present a work or multiple works of literary merit and universal appeal. Original? Wait, what? It says it needs to present a work of literary merit, but it's original. I don't know why it says.
I was in the category, though.
Yeah. I guess this is outdated. It's from before the speech change. But you need to, present your work. It can be known or unknown, and it should move, entertain, instruct, and or provoke the audience to thought, demonstrate style, originality, and creativity, and again, meet time requirements. Okay. So before you begin, there are a bunch of questions that you need to ask yourself. The first question is going to be, what does this story mean to me? So this is really important because you need to decide on something. Your story needs to mean something to you. I've had years where I think the year before last, I had a speech that it was kind of important to me but didn't really resound with me a whole lot. It was something that my mom thought would make a good speech, and moms are the best at selecting speeches. My mom always gives me such great ideas. But this one, it wasn't super something that was really important to me, and it didn't mean a whole lot to me. And so the speech just wasn't very interesting because I didn't like it that much because it didn't mean a whole lot to me. So you need to figure out what the story means to you and how it inspires you. Then next, you need to see what characters are important. And what show the theme that I want. So characters is something that's going to be really hard for you to, or at least it's always been really hard for me to decide what characters I want. You should not have more than, if it's a duo, it'd probably be more than like 6, right? Would you say? 6 is probably like max amount of characters that you're going to want for like a duo, and then what do you think for other speeches?
It depends on your ability, because the more you have to be able to portray them differently, or else the judges are going to be able to tell which is which. So maybe if it's your first time, max, you should only be playing like 2 characters yourself.
Yeah.
Maybe. And
yeah, that's great. That's good. Because it depends on what you're good at too. So something, I'm usually better at doing more characters. It's hard, but some people do better with just a couple of characters and really develop them well. Like, I guess for last year, Marco and I did a duo, and you're just Sam, right?
Yeah.
Marco was just one character, but he did it so phenomenally, and all of the judges were always like, wow, Sam, he was so great. It was, that one character was so good, and then I was a bunch of other characters that were necessary to the story. Then you need to choose what scenes are most important to you. You're going to follow the theme with these. And you also need to decide what part of the story you want to tell. This one is something that sometimes you can forget to think about. If you want to tell like the whole story, there's some interps where your book is going to be shorter and there's not as much of a story, or they're really long books that have a ton of like little stories all within them, and you don't have to do all of the little stories. You can choose just one specific element of a story. I've seen that done before, where there are like a ton of tiny parts of a story, and you have your one theme that you want, and just one part of your book illustrates that best. Like, I've seen, do y'all remember that one book, Grace, the book that you're thinking of doing your duo on? The Book Thief? Oh, sorry.
Oh,
you had thought of it before.
Okay, yeah.
So The Book Thief, there was one duo I watched on YouTube where they just did the introduction of it, and it was just like the introduction of that book, pretty much, and that's what they did their whole duo on. So it doesn't have to be like the whole thing. You can just have one smaller part and just really focus on that, and then you're able to, you know, develop it a lot. Because doing like a whole story would just be it can be really hard to cut if you have a really longer book. So you need to decide what's important to you. Do you want to tell like the whole story that the book portrays, or just a section of it? And think about how each section relates to your theme. So then steps to cutting your interp. So the first step should be choosing your theme. This is what I think is the most important part of your interp, is really, in my opinion, your theme, what you really want the judges and audience to get out of your speech. And once you have your theme, it takes the whole story and helps you decide what exactly, what scenes you want, what the audience gets out of your speech. And that's what makes a really good interp, is one that you can see your theme throughout the whole story, throughout every scene, and it's really visible and really spelled out. So once you have your theme, you need to choose the scenes that tell your story through the scene, through the theme. Then you need to limit your characters and scenes. I'll usually start out with an interp, maybe like 20 pages long, where I just have a whole lot of scenes, and you just need to decide what really fits in with your theme. So you'll have like a bunch of scenes. Maybe you have a bunch of, you know, scenes that you love because they're funny, or one because they really bring out your characters.
Yeah, like for our duo, we started with like 20 pages, and we kind of found like four or five.
Yeah, 4 or 5. So that's really the hardest part of your interp. Marco and I spent a super long time last year, just like figuring out what scenes we wanted, because that's really the most difficult part. So you need to limit the scenes to ones that only all have very specific purposes, which I'm going to get to in a minute. And then finally, you're going to have to cut unnecessary words and sentences and more scenes. So you really aren't going to end up with that many scenes. Sometimes when you come to the more advanced part of cutting your speech, it's going to have a lot of, you'll be cutting down so much that you'll have like just sentences where you only need like half the sentence, so you have to cut the other part, so that it fits within the time limit, because your time limit is of course super important. So next is your scene cutting checklist. I don't know if the board is that helpful. Should I be writing on the board? Do y'all care? Want me to write on the board? Okay. Okay. So the first thing on your individual teachers really have it hard. I never understand how they can like write on the board and talk at the same time. I have so much difficulty. Like I need to stop and be like, okay, let me write this and then I'll talk to you. So the first thing is character development. I guess this is in no particular order, because probably the most important thing in each scene is just tying back to your theme. But you need to show character development, because your speech is only 10 minutes, and every single scene you should be developing your characters within it, because if you have a scene that doesn't really develop your characters, then it'll just be more difficult for the judges to identify who they are. You need to really work on developing your characters throughout every scene. The next, to mark off your checklist, is to follow a story arc. You need to, I guess it doesn't have to be, you know, like one scene per like part of the arc, but it should definitely follow the arc, and really you need to follow your arc throughout the story. And then another one, this is getting a little bit nitpicky, but another one is creative blocking. So sometimes I'll just have scenes that they work well with my theme, they show character development, but they're just hard to have blocking for. You need to make sure that your scenes have opportunities for blocking, and that'll be helpful for later on when you're actually blocking your script, to have something to make sure that your scenes have opportunities for creative blocking. I guess it doesn't have to be too much too, because, yes.
Can you explain sort of what you understand what blocking is?
Blocking, yeah, of course. So blocking is what you're, basically your actions throughout your interpretation. Is that a good enough definition?
Demonstrate it real quick.
Okay, so blocking, maybe you have a scene where you're sitting down and you stand up. So blocking, maybe, let's see, you can say, I don't want this to happen, is your line. And then blocking for it, you could maybe sit down, have a desk, and then stand up and go, I don't want this to happen. My desk moved a little bit there.
That's good.
But yeah.
Yeah, basically it's like a choreography for a dance, but choreography for your speech, so you know what you're doing at certain times of your speech.
Right, yeah. And I think there's probably going to be a lecture on blocking. I hope there will be at least. Maybe we'll have Mr. Ruiz help out. You're the best at blocking. Yeah. And then the last one is tying back to your theme. So each scene should, of course, tie back to your theme, because you want to be telling your theme throughout the story. So then you'll have your checklist done. I'm sure there are more things that you'll think of throughout that's important for your. Does anyone have anything else to add? Something you should remember throughout every scene? Okay. And also, if y'all have any questions, just feel free to ask me literally whenever.
So basically the checklist is when you have something you want to do, ask yourself these questions. Does it develop the characters, follow the story? Is there any creative blocking?
Yeah.
And
It doesn't do most of those things, you should probably ask these questions.
Right.
the easiest way to make sure you do every single one of those things is to have the theme. Like, Sophia and I's theme for our duo was, you are enough. And every single scene in some way, like, portrayed it at, we repeat it so many times, and the characters developed around that. And so if you once you have a theme, everything else can wrap around that. It's a lot.
Right, yeah, I was gonna talk about that earlier, but really your theme makes everything fall into place. Like Marco and I had so much trouble deciding what our theme was gonna be, and that's when our script was like 20 pages. Then your theme can be like just a single line that really, resonates with you within your script, just a single line. We had a line that was "you are enough." Was this line just really stuck out to us, and that's what we built our story around, is that one line, "you are enough," and we repeated it throughout our introduction, and we showed it throughout our speech, and I think that was really important for us to have that theme and to have everything centralized around your theme pretty much. So next, your introduction. So I would say to write your introduction, my recommendation is to write your introduction after you've cut your script. Maybe you could do a rough draft, but what I personally recommend is to write your introduction after you have your script, or at least the main scenes that you want to do. So usually your script in the line of things should be after your teaser scene, your hook, which is the inciting incident. So then you draw the audience's attention with your little inciting incident, and then you put in the introduction, which is often your exposition too. So you can introduce your theme through this. You can directly say it, or you can just kind of show it, really. Sometimes you spell it out, and that can be helpful for the judges, or you can show your theme a little bit. You can introduce characters. This is not completely necessary, but you can show the audience what the characters are. A note on that is you can't give the lines, any lines to the characters. You can't be like, you can say, join Max, and then you'd be like, Max. But you can't say, join Max, and then he'd be like, I'm Max, I'm gonna slay a dragon, because that would be giving lines to someone that you wrote yourself. So you can't do that, but you can show them, join Max, and then, you have Max. You can set the stage for your story. Sometimes, I've seen it's impactful too when people ask a question. They'll be like, so, sometimes I wonder, is this important? And then you ask a question which makes the audience ponder, and then you answer it through your speech. You can also clear potential confusion. An example of this is Lydia Pruitt did Les Mis, and I think just 2 years ago, she did Les Mis as open speech, and judges would get confused because there were her own or some of the lines were narrated by the main character. There was narration, and there was also exact scenes. So sometimes judges would see the narration and think that was her own writing, which you can't do. It has to be lines. So within her introduction, she goes, join the main character as she tells her story, and through the speech. So then the judges knew, oh, she's not saying those lines herself. She didn't write them herself. They're just part of the story. So that's an example of clearing potential confusion that your audience is going to have. And then, of course, you need to have the title and the author within your introduction. Okay, then I just have a random note on formatting your script. This is a kind of a rule new as of last year, I think. Last year. You can't put the name of the character speaking on your script. This is kind of just a technicality, but you can't put the name of the person who says the line and then the line. Instead, you just write the line without any quotation marks or anything.
I would recommend though, for your own copy that you do it, just who's talking.
I would recommend that
But
too.
for script submission, you can't put Max colon and then what Max says. It just has to be what Max says.
Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Because that's pretty much all that I had. Questions? Are we doing assignments, Eden? Okay, so yeah, so the assignments are to complete the series of questions checklist. I kind of went through that earlier, some. And then the second assignment is to complete the storyline scene selection worksheet. So there's somewhere in your speech thing.
Okay, and then before the next lecture, everybody, if you've done your interp homework, where should we turn it in? Everybody's good. And you can get